Hey, Trevor Security here, and today I want to talk to you about part one of our two-part series on how stress can affect your hormones, and most importantly, how your flight or fight responses can affect your hormones. So if you are interested in this stuff, please tune in for our second part, which will come up soon. If you like our page, subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest in our videos that are coming out for you. All right, so let's get into it. How does stress and how do our fight and flight responses affect our hormones? All right, so to start with, we need to understand the human brain. The human brain has a lot of different components to it. And the big one I want to talk about today is the flight or fight response. That's what the first one I want to talk about. So our flight or fight response really is initiated by two key areas in the human brain. One of them is our central processing area called your hypothalamus, which takes in all the information from outside to determine whether or not you need to initiate a response. And the second one is our midbrain. And our midbrain is the upper part of our brainstem, and this is really our sympathetic or our flight or fight center house. So when we have a potential threat that affects our potential life and our livelihood, whether it be a perceived threat or an actual threat, what ends up happening is that our midbrain, via our hypothalamus as well, winds itself up and gets wound up. As it winds up, it has an outflow that comes through our sympathetic nervous system and eventually to a receptor. Now that receptor could be on a number of different things. Could be a blood vessel, could be a muscle, could be a digestive system, or a whole lot of different things, even perhaps your heart or your lungs. And the whole purpose of doing that is to try and make it safer for you to survive. So we might get blood constriction in the periphery that gives you cold hands and cold feet to try and get the blood closer to the trunk. We may have an elevation in your heart rate. These are the type of things that we're looking at. One of the problems with this mechanism though is it's quite energy taxing on the human brain to constantly be putting this output, especially if it goes on for a long period of time. And I'll talk about why that may be in a little bit. But when this constantly keeps going out, eventually the brain says we need to make it more energy efficient. How can we do that? And the receptor actually has a volume control on the receptor itself, a way of turning up or turning down the volume of how well it's hearing this information coming from your flight or fight responses. And whilst there's a lot of different ways you can do it, one of the main ones that does this is a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol is our main stress hormone. So when we start getting elevation of cortisol, this receptor becomes highly sensitized, and as it becomes sensitized, the result of that is that we have this drive that comes through, we have an increased susceptibility to that response, and it increases the outflow. But more importantly, what it really does is that it means that we can get the same level of flight or fight response just simply by having a reduced flight or fight pattern. So in other words, let's make some figures up. So if it took 10 units of flight or fight response, 10 units of sympathetic activation to create 10 units of activation over here, if we double the volume level, double the receptor here, now 5 lots of input from here will create that same 10 there. So it decreases some of the stress and the workload off the brain by just changing these hormones around. So what are some of the key things that will create this long-term stress pattern? So there's a few different things that'll do that. So the first and the most obvious, the most significant one that we see is changes to your balance centers. That really is a big thing. So the brain has a huge vested interest in the safety of itself, and it doesn't want to hit the ground. So balance is one of the big key things that will create long-term changes here. Another way it creates long-term changes here is changes to your TMJ. So jaw movement, bite pattern problems, teeth alignment, these type of things can do that simply because they're putting direct input into that midbrain and winding it up as well. Cervical spine problems, chronic neck pain, chronic neck dysfunction is also putting input into there as well. So these are some of the big things. Looking away from inside the human body, there are lifestyle factors. The biggest lifestyle factor that we really see drive this up comes from your eyes, and that really has to do with exposure to screens, especially things like your mobile phones. Vertical scrolling, blue bright flashing lights really does wind up this mechanism. And these are one of the key things that we look for when we start looking for people who have chronic hormonal shifts as a result of stress, is which of these systems really are being affected. We'll chuck balance in there as well. Which of these key systems are really being affected, and what is the outflow effect on that? So how this affects your hormones, we'll go through in part 2, but this has a lot to do with the way cortisol plays its role. So if you're interested, please tune into our next vid, and hopefully we can get you some more information that may just hopefully help change your life a little bit. If you have any questions in the meantime, please post them up or email me, send me a message, whatever is easiest for you. Always happy to help in any way, shape or form we can. Speak soon.